Everyone's favorite time of the year is right around the corner, college football season. To celebrate, DraftKings Sportsbook, America's top-rated sportsbook app, is putting new players in the center of the action with $200 in free bets instantly if you bet $1 or more on any college football game. Take advantage of this limited-time offer now. You heard right. DraftKings is giving all new players $200 in free bets instantly when you place a bet of $1 or more on any college football game, no matter what. Head to the DraftKings Sportsbook app now to check out all of the great promotions and daily odds boost that they are offering. DraftKings Sportsbook is safe, secure, and reliable, located right here in the United States, so it's easy to deposit and withdraw your money at your convenience. Download the DraftKings Sportsbook app now and use promo code THPN to receive $200 in free bets when you place a $1 bet on any college football game. That's promo code THPN to get your free $200 in free bets instantly for a limited time only at DraftKings Sportsbook. Must be 21 or older, New Jersey, Indiana, or Pennsylvania only. New customers only. Restrictions apply. See DraftKings.com/sportsbook for details. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER. Or, in Indiana, 1-800-9-WITH-IT. You're listening to Spurscast, episode 623. My name is Paul Garcia, and I'm your host here on the Spurscast. Today I'll be joined by Project Spurs writer Collin Reid. In this episode, Collin and I will recap the Spurs' opening week of free agency, and we'll review the Salt Lake City Summer League. Let's go to get started. Collin, how are you doing?
I'm doing well. How are you doing?
I'm doing very well. You know, you and I were just on the Spurscast a week ago, right before free agency started, and wow, was this a wild, unusual type of free agency for the San Antonio Spurs. That was a little bit different than what we're used to here. I mean, there's still moves probably going to be made here, so we'll get into that in depth. Spurscast listeners, thank you for joining us. Just want to make sure I note this because, you know, the Spurs have been making some wild moves lately that just came out of nowhere, so I do want to note that we're recording this call now at 2 o'clock in the afternoon on a Saturday, so just letting you all know that. All right, so Collin, let's begin with just some different news before we get into the bulk of our podcast here, and that is first on Team USA. Coach Pop and Keldon Johnson, they get a gold medal. Well, Coach Pop technically doesn't, but you know Keldon does, but he guided them toward that gold medal win. Team USA defeated Spain first in elimination game, then Australia, Patty Mills, and then also newest Spur, Jock Landale. And then, of course, the gold medal game on Friday evening in San Antonio for us, those that live here. It was a gold medal game, and Team USA won that game against France to win the gold. So Coach Pop guides the team as a head coach for the first time. And then also, you know, Keldon didn't get a lot of minutes, but still he's a gold medal winner as a member of the Spurs. Now, I do want to bring up the last game before the gold medal game, and that was against Australia in that knockout game because it was a newest Spur on the team, and that's going to be Jock Landale. He's a center from Australia. Currently was playing in the NBL over there with Melbourne. And so I really during this game I really wanted to see what he does. That was like a really good opportunity for me to just get like a little scouting on him in one specific game and just see what he does. And I was very impressed by what he does. Brought to the court on both ends of the floor. I noticed that he's very quick for a big, even though he's like your traditional 6'11", 7-foot center. He's actually very quick on his feet, and he also knows good spacing. Like he's not afraid to take threes. He immediately knows to, if they're going to do like a 5-out set, he knows to go stand in the corner or stand up above the arc and be in the passing lanes for threes. And he has a pretty quick release on his shot. So that was something he didn't make. I don't think he made a three in that game, but still, it's very impressive that he knew exactly where to go on the floor for being a center and knowing how to space out the offense. The next thing I noticed was that he showed a very quick burst on one possession. He had the ball near the 3-point arc and he kind of faked a dribble handoff, and then he just like bursted toward the lane and got into the paint, and Team USA was off. They were caught off guard with how fast he was, and so they were forced to foul him, and he got fouled. So that was actually very impressive. I also noticed that in the second half, Team USA did a great job of really frustrating Patty Mills. They had a really good defensive scheme against him and all their perimeter players in Australia. So because of that, Jock Landale was the only player who even got decent looks against Team USA, because we know that Team USA runs a lot more small ball type of lineups. He did a good job in the post, and he got some pretty good quality shots there in that second half. So again, we see that that he can score interior if he's not playing against opponents his size. And then the last thing I noticed was that he's actually showing some lateral quickness on defense. There was one possession where KD could try to go one-on-one with him, at the top of the three-point arc. He basically tried to drive left by Landale, but Landale kind of shuffled his feet very well, and Durant had to basically take like a fadeaway mid-ranger, and he made the shot because KD's just phenomenal. But still, the fact that if Landale's able to stay with bigs like KD, one of the elite bigs in the NBA, that's going to be a good sign. So again, I was just very impressed with just the one game that I saw him in. Collin, did you have any thoughts just based on some of those the scouting reports that I provided?
Yeah, I think for me, and I think this is where a lot of my confusion with the outcry of the Spurs needing a big has come from lately. We heard about Spurs fans wanting a big in the draft. We heard about them wanting a big in free agency. And I think that was really confusing to me because I think Jakob Poeltl is a starting quality center in the NBA, and then backup center is such an easy role to fill, and the bar is so low to get production minutes from that spot. And so knowing that he has these skills of spacing, some burst, some quickness, that to me is interesting in terms of the bar for production for backup centers in the NBA right now is so low that I feel like, at least on the offensive end, he can play himself in. One of the things that I'm wondering, though, is that some of those kind of bigger, stronger centers, just because of the way that the NBA is headed, have kind of been pushed to the bench or to these smaller minutes. So I'm interested what would happen if he's matched up with those more often, just kind of with what you've told me so far. However, I just think if he has any sort of offensive contributions at all, that's about what you can expect from a backup center in today's NBA. So I think that it was a great get for them. If it's one of those things where it's an experiment and they try it for a year or two, doesn't really work out, then they don't really lose a lot from this. But if they kind of gain a rotation player for years to come, then they've had a big win. So it's a very low risk, high reward type of proposition to sign him.
Yeah, for sure. And just he's only 25, and so he already got to see, on the international stage, got to play against some of the better players in the NBA, already getting that kind of exposure and that type of experience. So that's going to be interesting. Again, and we'll get a little bit further into Landale now in our next segment. So this next segment, I'm calling it, the title here is Free Agency Review So Far. And the reason why I say that's a so far is because there's still going to be some moves here down the road that the Spurs need to figure out. So let's first begin, Collin, with the trades that the Spurs made. So again, this is a very active offseason for San Antonio to be included in multiple trades. The first one, the big one, was that DeMar DeRozan was signed and traded to the Chicago Bulls, and in return, the Spurs got Thaddeus Young, Al-Farouq Aminu, a 2025 first-round pick from the Bulls, and also 2 future second-round picks. This is interesting because just right before you and I got ready to record, I was listening to a podcast with Zach Lowe of ESPN, and he mentioned that Thaddeus Young is going to be a player that teams are going to want as we get closer to the playoff months from now, and he thinks that maybe there's a chance the Spurs could get a first-round pick for him. They could flip him because he and Aminu are both on expiring deals. Young's going to make $14 million this coming season, and then Aminu's at $10 million. So again, Zach Lowe thinks that down the road here, before February, March, whatever the trade deadline is, that the Spurs might be able to flip Young. Also, the Spurs were involved in another trade, a 5-team trade that included the Brooklyn Nets and Washington Wizards, and basically the Spurs got back Chandler Hutchinson, who's going to make $4 million this coming season, and also a 2022 second-round pick from the Wizards. And then they had to send out the draft rights to Nikola Milutinov, who was a former Spurs first-round pick in 2015, but he's never made his way to the NBA. So again, these are two. Just give me your thoughts, Collin, initially. Again, I don't know how many of these players are going to stay on the roster because as we get to further into this episode, there's going to be a roster crunch that has to happen no matter what. So I don't know how long these players will be on the roster, but just kind of give me your thoughts on the trades that the Spurs made.
Well, I think it's interesting to think about the Spurs maybe flipping Thad Young for assets because he is, of all the players that the Spurs received in trades, the best one by, I would say, a pretty healthy margin. And so the idea that they flip him, to me, says that the Spurs, maybe not fantastic rebuild, but just understanding that their timeline to compete for a championship is not right now, and that they would sacrifice even short-term playoff aspirations to maybe even make the playoffs or play-ins for lottery assets, or draft assets, might not be lottery assets. But I think, the Spurs haven't shown that willingness, even though they've kind of been moving in that direction for a while. So I think that kind of move would be incredibly interesting in terms of showing where their mindset is at with what they want to do going forward. I will say, though, that I do think if they keep Thad Young, that he can have a big contribution to this group. He was good for the Bulls last year. He's a great defensive player. There's just a lot that he can bring to the table for this team. And so kind of he's the only one that I think, to me, is really kind of this impact rotation player for this team. And if they decide to flip him for draft capital, that really shows kind of a marked change in the Spurs mindset than where it was the last couple seasons. So I think he's an interesting player for a couple of reasons, because one, he'll be a contributor, and two, if they do decide to flip him, now we are going, maybe not the tank route for the Spurs, but they are thinking a little bit more rebuildy than I think they've kind of been doing in the past.
Okay, yeah, I agree with you there, and I also agree with you on Thad Young. I think that, if you look at Prophet X's kind of career projections, they project him to, he was an impact starter last year, and they still project him to be an impact starter in these next 2 years. So he's going to continue to play at that type of level right now, at a productive level. Whereas Aminu and Hutchinson, they're more so like depth kind of players toward the end of the roster at this point. Especially Hutchinson, even though he's young, he still hasn't really proved anything in the NBA at this point. Okay, so now let's look at some of the signings that they made. There's quite a few signings here, and some of them were kind of expected. Some of them were more, very surprising. So let's begin with some expected ones. Just before, back in June, I was kind of like making these scouting profiles for our other Project Spurs Network site called AnalyzingTheLeague.com, and I had looked at Doug Mcdermott as a player who, he stretches the floor, and he's going to provide. He can play the 3 or the 4 for the team, and they need shooting. So I was like, okay, McDermott's a good player for the Spurs to look at. And sure enough, they did sign him for 3 years, $42 million. Now, last week when I didn't have him in our list, Spurscast listeners of the free agents that I was looking at, only because of his age. I think he was like 28 or 29, and I just felt like I thought that they were going to look at specific free agents that were kind of in that age group of like Derek White and DeJounte Murray and some of the younger players. So that's why I didn't have him on the list. But initially, I thought that he would be a good fit for the Spurs, and sure enough, they inked him to a 3-year, $42 million deal. Then this next player was reported that the Spurs did have interest in him. This is Zach Collins. Now he's a little bit interesting because of his situation. He got a 3-year, $22 million deal. Now, we don't know right now how much of this deal is guaranteed. And the reason why I say we have to keep an eye on that is because he has a major history of being injured. He's really only had like one complete healthy season in the NBA at this point. He currently is injured even to come into the Spurs because just right at late June, Shams had tweeted that he had fractured his foot that he had just had surgery on. So again, we don't even know when he's expected to be on the court. So for now, it's a 3-year, $22 million deal. And it is interesting to see how much of that deal is fully guaranteed. Then the very surprising signing that we mentioned earlier that nobody had their eye on was Jock Landale. This just came out of nowhere, where the Spurs reportedly signed him to a 2-year deal. We don't know how much it's for. I'm thinking it's for the minimum, only because he is an undrafted player. He I think it was 2018 when he tried to get into the draft, and he went undrafted. So again, because he has no NBA experience, I would assume it's for the minimum. But who knows if they gave him a little bit more to bring him from Australia, from his former club. And then another more surprising signing that had some definitely got the Spurs fan base riled up was Brynn Forbes coming back to the team. He was also re-signed, or he's going to re-sign. We do not know yet the amount that he's re-signing for, and we also don't know how many years it's for. It could be 1-year deal, it could be multiple years. We don't know. It can be anywhere from the minimum or to the room exception of $4.9 million. So I know there's a lot there, Collin. Just give me your analysis on all these moves that they made so far.
Yeah. So I know both of us are big fans of the NBA, and so there'll be times where we're just consuming NBA content. And I always try to look for pods, even like local market pods. And sometimes you just find a podcast that, even if it's not a team you follow, is just interesting. And for some reason, that ended up being true with the Locked On Pacers podcast. I just enjoy their podcast, something about it. And I know I was listening earlier last season, and I didn't really listen as much later on in the season, but earlier in the season when the Pacers were looking like they were having a good season before everything kind of completely fell off the rails, they were talking that Doug McDermott was actually doing more off the dribble than they had noticed that he had before, which is just kind of an interesting wrinkle in that. I think he can do a good amount offensively. It's just nice that the Spurs are getting another player who can space the floor, but a player who can also kind of create his own shot off the dribble is nice too, just because I think the Spurs have a lot of players who can create offense for themselves off the dribble, but kind of like what we talked about in the free agent preview for a couple weeks now, in terms of players who can create for others, they have players who can do that, but not like at an A+ level like DeMar DeRozan can, in my opinion. Mm-hmm. So the fact that they have like a collection of players who can create offense for themselves is kind of helpful, just because they don't have that like high tier create for others player right now, and Derek White and DeJounte Murray can both do that. at a good level, but just maybe not an elite level like DeMar can. And I think Zach Collins is really, really interesting to me. It's another one of those gambles, kind of like Jock Landale. Unfortunately, with this one, it's a little bit higher risk just because of the length of the contract. But like you said, it might not be guaranteed in the couple back years there.
Yeah.
But the nice thing about the Spurs at this position is that, unlike in past years where they're like gung-ho on competing, if they really do shift to this mindset of like, we want to develop internally while also continuing to build draft capital, then they can waive him without stretching him because they're in this position where every dollar doesn't count anymore.
Yeah.
Some of these kind of things in the past where they've taken risks and they haven't worked out, they have to waive and then stretch, and then that lasts for years and years and years. But now they're in a position where, especially if a lot of the contract later on isn't guaranteed, they can waive them without having to stretch it, and then that's not going to affect the books for quite as long. And so hopefully in 3 or 4 years, when they're kind of getting back to a playoff contending type team, they won't have to upside move, which I like. I like that they're kind of taking some swing for the fences moves. This one does come with a little bit more risk, but not too bad, I think. And then Brynn Forbes is interesting. I think he had a pretty good playoffs. I think people will point to the fact that he got played off the floor in a couple of the series.
Yeah.
But the fact that he was really impactful in one of the series, I think that's the best you can ask for in a rotation player. Like, okay, sure, he didn't get a lot of playing time after that first series, or if he did, it wasn't quite as good. But like, he was amazing in that series against the Heat for the Bucks. And if you have a rotation player who has one amazing series on a way to a championship, that's really all you can ask for. Now, does that mean he's going to have an amazing year? No, but he's a role player, which means that he should be good in spot and roll situations, and I think he's proven that he can do that. He'll still be, probably a liability on the defensive end, but the Spurs kind of have less of those on the court now with some of their free agents moves. Yeah. So I think it's good for this team that needs more shooting to have another shooter, and I think they can make up for his defensive liabilities a little bit easier than they could when they were playing both him and DeRozan together.
Okay, so I had two thoughts, and just kind of bringing up what you mentioned there about McDermott. When I did McDermott's scouting profile back in June, I did notice, and it actually surprised me, that the majority of his shots, the majority of his shots came actually in the paint, not from three, and that's actually very surprising when you think of a guy who's just a shooter. So that goes back to what you just mentioned, that he was learning how last season how to grow and putting the ball on the floor and making plays, because he was actually getting in, and when you look at Cleaning the Glass's rankings, he's basically one of the top players as a forward that scores near the rim. So like, that's actually an accuracy and an attempt. So again, that's a very good sign to see that he's not just a spot up shooter. He's going to be able to know how to get into the paint and put the ball on the floor for a team that's going to lack a lot of shot creation, since DeRozan did leave. And then going back to Brynn Forbes, one thought that I had was that I remember a few years ago when there was a season when Forbes was on the team, and when there was a bunch of injuries, when I think it was DeJounte Murray was out, and then another point guard, and Forbes basically had to run the backup point guard for a while there. And so I always envisioned that maybe down the road they wanted him to kind of take that Patty Mills type of role, where Patty just kind of gets the Spurs into their sets. He's not quite having to do what DeJounte and what DeRozan did with the offense. He gets to be more so like a spot up shooter a lot of times as well. And so I really wonder if that's kind of what they want Brynn to be. If they don't feel like Trey Jones is quite ready just yet to become like the backup point guard for this team, whether maybe they just throw out lineups with like Lonnie and Brynn Forbes, where you have like two different guards, even though one's not a traditional point guard, they have just different guards out there with a lot of shooting, because that's what Brynn's going to definitely bring you. So again, it's interesting that they brought him back, and the amount's not going to be for a lot. It's going to be like at max, it's probably going to be at $4.9 million. It's not going to be like a huge like $10 to $15 million deal. So again, so again, we'll see what happens. Again, those are the signings that they made so far. Now let's talk about the players that are gone from this team. DeMar DeRozan's gone. He went to Chicago, like we mentioned. Rudy Gay signed as an unrestricted free agent in Utah. Patty Mills, who's been with the Spurs for a long time, the last member of their championship team, has gone now to the Brooklyn Nets to go compete for a championship. Trey Lyles got a deal with the Detroit Pistons, and then a player that the Spurs reportedly wanted to bring back, Gorgui Dieng, who was pretty good last year for them in his minutes off the bench. He ended up signing with Atlanta. So all those players are now gone from the roster. Some unknowns that we don't know about right now. Keita Bates-Diop, he's still a restricted free agent as of now, as of this morning that we're recording, because the Spurs haven't quite yet pulled his qualifying offer or renounced his cap hold. So they have until August 13th to take away the qualifying offer without his permission. So they can still do that. They have a few more days here to do that. And again, right now, just all indications for what I see, just because of there's no roster space left that we're going to talk about in a bit here, I don't think he's coming back. Keita Bates-Diop, and then also Quindary Weatherspoon, who's also an unrestricted free agent. The Spurs haven't quite yet renounced his cap hold, but it looks like he's not coming back because he's currently playing with another summer league team. I think it's the Cavs is who he was with. There's another summer league team that he's on right now. Anyway, all right, so now let's talk about our next segment. It's called More Moves to Come, and so this has to happen. And the reason why I'm calling this is because as of right now, these all these deals aren't official yet, but when they become official, the Spurs are actually going to have 17 players on their roster when we don't include training camp invites or two-way players. And the reason is by the time opening night gets here in the season, they have to be down to 15 players. So here's what we know about some of the roster construction. We know that Drew Eubanks is on a non-guaranteed contract up until August 19th. So the Spurs have about a week and a half left to make a decision on are they going to bring Eubanks back or not. Now, before we started free agency, I was of the mindset of, yeah, they're going to bring Eubanks back. He's done very good. He's continued to grow in his role in these last few seasons. Coach Pop definitely trusts him a lot more than some of the other bigs on the roster behind Jakob Poeltl. However, with the moves they've made, there's not going to be many minutes for Eubanks. I mean, he's going to have to be competing with McDermott at the 4. You got Thaddeus Young at the 4 or the 5. He could play both. Aminu's there at the 4. You still got to get Lucas Samanic some minutes somehow. I don't know how he's going to get minutes at all. You still got Jakob Poeltl at the 5 if you want to play Eubanks at the 5. Now you have Landale at the 5. And then whenever Zach Collins eventually gets healthy, well, then now Zach Collins is coming in to compete for minutes at the 4 or the 5. So, I mean, now because of all the depth they've added, I'm very I'm thinking now just because they need roster space, I think that there's a chance that Eubanks might get waived. What do you think about Eubanks' situation?
Yeah, I think it's just difficult in terms of kind of everything that you outlined there. They have a lot of quality bigs at the 4 and the 5, kind of as you mentioned, and because he's on a contract that hasn't guaranteed yet, it makes him one of the easiest options to waive. It's not, if you're waiving one of the other options here to kind of clear up the roster, you are waiving kind of salary that's not going to come off the cap. And not that the Spurs really need cap space for this league year anymore. Free agency is already passed. They're probably not going to pick anyone up in the buyout market, even though we would have thought that last year too, and they actually got a very quality player in the buyout market. But it's just with the guarantee date kind of coming up and just with everything else going on, like you said, there might be more moves to be made.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I know that people have speculated because some of the moves just seem so weird.
Yeah.
Is there a trade in the works? And sometimes weird things just happen and there's no trade. But if there is a trade, then that could clear up the space to keep a Eubanks or something. But I would say if there's nothing else major in the works and that the roster is just going to kind of be trimmed down to 15, I would imagine that he might be one of kind of the casualties here. I would be interested though to see if he makes it into summer camp or something. And I don't know. It's hard because he does seem like a valuable piece of their team, but to me it just kind of makes sense that he probably is going to be the one to get cut here.
Yeah, that's my, that's where I'm at too, just like you. Unless they make different moves with trades or waiving other players to open up more roster spots, then, unfortunately it looks right now, at least on paper, that he's going to have to be the player that gets waived. And again, he's played really good. He's continued to develop, and Coach Pop definitely likes him because you can tell he gives him a lot of minutes as that backup big behind Jakob. But again, just because of all the players they brought in right now on paper, it looks like, it might be unfortunate for Eubanks that he might get waived. So again, we'll see. He has until, the Spurs have until August 19th to make that determination, and we'll see what other moves they make before then. And now, even if they waive Eubanks, well, then guess what? They still have one more player they have to move off this roster, because then they'd be at 16 players. And again, you got to get it down to 15 full NBA slots by opening night. Now you can still have two-way players, but that, we're not talking about two-way just yet. And so because of that, they're going to have to make a choice. Are they moving Chandler Hutchinson, who's only going to make $4 million this coming season, or are they going to move Aminu, who probably doesn't look like he's going to be part of the rotation, but he's making $10.2 million. You want to have that contract to move. That's a good contract to trade down the road. You can try to move that contract to just, it's a good salary filler. And then also, they have Joe Wieskamp, who looks more and more, unless there's moves made, kind of like for Eubanks. If there's no other moves made, I mean, it's going to be tough to give Wieskamp, the second round pick, a roster spot. So I honestly think he's going to end up on a two-way contract. So what are your thoughts on that situation as well? The fact that even if they waive Eubanks, they still got to get rid of one more player. Yeah,
and I think knowing that they have to probably get Wieskamp on a two-way is a little bit difficult for me, just for the same reason that we talked about it right after the draft, and the sense of okay, if he does find his range from deep, if he does become a consistent contributor, now all of a sudden, especially from his shooting, now all of a sudden, he's past this 2-day window. Let's say the Spurs are competing for a play-in spot and his shooting is valuable to the rotation. Now they need to waive another player just to sign him to a full deal. And, it's one of those things that it's easier to, I guess, cross that bridge when you get there. But just because he has a skill that could be valuable to the Spurs making a push for the play-in or like in a first-round series, I kind of wish that he were on the main roster. But I also understand that just with the roster crunch, that's hard to make happen. But I would agree with you. I mean, like you said, that Aminu contract is just so good in terms of like trade salary. Because then instead of having to trade 2 of the young core, you can trade 1 of the young core with kind of a bigger salary there. But it's one of those things where I guess Hutchinson would be the best other option.
Yeah.
I think it was just interesting because I know that after that second day of free agency, a lot of us thought, cool, the Spurs have done their offseason.
Yeah.
And then like 3 more signings came in and we were like, okay, how are they going to do this? So I'm really interested to see what this roster looks like on opening night because it will look different than this. I think, like you're saying, Eubanks and Hutchinson makes the most sense. But if they bring them into training camp and they like them more than other options, it'll be interesting to see what happens to those other options. So I think it's really up in the air, and it could kind of be a long game before we figure out kind of what this roster looks like in season.
Exactly, and the reason why I say Hutchinson is because just looking at his situation specifically, he hasn't really, he's already been on. This is going to be his 3rd team now that he's gone to. He started off with Chicago. 3rd team now that he's gone to. He started off with Chicago, then he went to made his name in the NBA. He hasn't really done anything. I think he's probably dealt with some injuries as well, and then also just the salary, $4 million. So and then also even to get a chance, let's just say the Spurs are going for more development. It doesn't matter. Like he's still got to compete with minutes for Devin Vassell, who's looking really good in summer league. He's got to compete with Lonnie Walker IV, who's up for a contract extension or could be a restricted free agent. So, and then he's got Derek White and DeJounte Murray is still there. So there's just like even if they wanted to keep him and give him a chance, it's going to be hard for him to even crack that rotation as a brand new player on this team. And so because of his salary situation, unless they trade him or trade other players before this, before the opening night of the season, I really feel like just because of his salary situation, he might also end up being waived for the Spurs. So again, we'll kind of see what they're going to do again, because there has to be a roster crunch at some point before opening night, which is I think mid-October is when the season starts, or late October. All right, so now, even though the Spurs were reported to be active in these talks, we always want to revisit the situation with Ben Simmons. The reason why is because we know that they at least had interest at one point in him. So we know that the original offer right before the draft was one of the young players plus 4 first-round picks plus 3 pick swaps, and of course the Spurs said no to that from Philly. So now that the Spurs have made all these different moves, it's a little bit different because now they don't have that cap space anymore. So let's talk about what would it still take to get Ben Simmons, because until Ben Simmons is on a different team, we kind of have to keep revisiting the situation, because we know that the Spurs at least at one time had interest here. So Collin, you crunched the numbers and you basically figured out that since the Spurs no longer have cap space, in order to get Simmons, they would have to at least send out $26.3 million in salary cap. In salary for, amongst different players. Now the way to make that work is most likely going to be we know that Philly wants a young player, so that could be Derek White or DeJounte Murray, and then you probably send them with a player who's going to be a good piece for Philly, but also because the salaries work, is somebody like Thaddeus Young would probably be included. So we figured either Derek and Thaddeus Young or DeJounte and Thaddeus Young, that gets you to about $29 million in salary, and so that makes the deal work, and it also keeps Philly under the tax as long as they waive some of their non-guaranteed players. So again, if there's a trade in terms of players, it's going to be probably a combination of those 2 players for Simmons if that were to happen. Now, and then now the Spurs, maybe it doesn't look as difficult for them to send 4 first-round picks. Maybe they send 3 first, and then maybe that new Bulls pick that they just got that's supposed to come out in 2025. And then we don't know if Philly won the pick swaps. And if this were to happen, you and I have been looking into the CBA and looking at different things, and we've kind of figured out that the most likely thing is that if they included Thaddeus with one of the Spurs players like DeJounte or Derek, then the deal would probably have to wait for about 2 months. So there's some cap rules there why that has to happen. But if not, there's also another rule though, that if they take Thaddeus and Aminu into salary cap space, well, then maybe they can just make that type of trade happen quickly. So the most the expectation is that it would take 2 months after Thaddeus lands in San Antonio to send him to the Sixers if this trade were to happen. Again, there's no reporting that it's going to happen. We're just revisiting what would it take to make this type of deal happen. So Collin, give me your thoughts on if the Spurs were to talk with the Sixers again.
Sure, and kind of just going into another theoretical option here is, let's say that like we wake up tomorrow and the Spurs and 76ers have agreed to a trade for Ben Simmons and the DeRozan sign-in trade hasn't officially happened yet, then the Ben Simmons deal can actually be folded into that and happen immediately. Kind of with the same construction you were talking about. Yeah, I just want to give a shout out to Jack Fahey, I think. I don't know how to say his last name, but he was kind of giving me some cap guidance on this, and he did mention that if it was folded into the original deal, that it could work as intended. So, and you know, again, not reporting, I know nothing, but you did say that, you know, one of the cap wasn't DeRozan one of the cap holds that actually hasn't been.
Yes, DeRozan to Chicago as of 2:31 p.m. that you and I are recording this. They have not officially made that transaction happen yet.
So they could actually fold it into that deal, and then it would happen right away. But the other problem here is, and this is a trade where Daryl Morey is making a decision on which team to trade with. So Ben Simmons doesn't have a lot of optionality here, especially because his contract is so long. So even if a team thinks that Ben Simmons doesn't want to go there, then okay, who cares? They'll just get him anyway. They still have like 4 years of his contract, and then they can try to do what they can to keep him during that time. But I know that we've all heard of the interview that Jason Dumas gave on Philly radio, talking about how he's completely shut off communication with the Sixers, completely shut off communication with Embiid. But one of the quotes in there that has been kind of also not looked at very much was he said he sees Toronto, he sees Portland, and Ben, to be frank, being a young socialite that he is, he's not looking to go to any of those situations. He's open to going to the California teams. And it is a trade, so he doesn't have a choice. But in my mind, I imagine if he doesn't want to go to Toronto and Portland because he's a young socialite, that would probably mean that San Antonio is a turnoff for a similar reason. But again, he doesn't have a choice, and if the Spurs get him in, you know, they can, if they have success with him and build around him for 3 or 4 years, then, you know, obviously that could change his mind. And it's interesting that I think the clutch agency and Ben Simmons are trying to do anything they can to get some leverage here, when that would maybe matter if he had like 1 year left on his contract. But, you know, it's hard to create that same type of leverage when the contract goes so far out. So we'll see if that dissuades any teams. I can't imagine that it would. If the Spurs had interest before, that they should probably still have interest, but it's just, he's kind of putting out the signals that he wants to go to a California team. But Daryl Morey does not strike me as the kind of executive that would acquiesce to a request like that. So, it'll be interesting to see if they still have interest here.
Yeah, so you're right. I mean, and again, until he gets moved from Philly right now, we're going to continue to revisit this, even though, you know, there's no late reporting yet that the Spurs have more interest in him. But again, because of that initial reporting that the Spurs did want to, you know, look into the situation of what would they need to do to acquire Ben Simmons, you know, we're going to continue to revisit that until he gets moved to a team. And like you mentioned, Collin, you know, the fact that if he's not talking to the Sixers, you know, not really engaged with them, all signs point to they're probably not going to bring him in by the time training camp starts. So there could be a move here. And I know a lot of the national outlets continue, like every podcast you listen to, everyone's always talking about Ben Simmons, what's going to happen with him. So I think that, that he's going to continue to revisit even here on the Spurscast until we figure out exactly what's happening. And just for you Spurscasters, we wanted to kind of visit exactly the cap part of this. You know, what do the Spurs need to do? And again, that's interesting what Collin noted, that, you know, they could do a sign and trade multi-team like they've been doing with different other deals. And again, you know, technically DeRozan's not on the Bulls yet, and so they haven't made that trade as of right now. So we'll kind of see what ends up happening with the Ben Simmons situation. All right, so for our last topic, I just want to, you know, the Spurs just completed their Salt Lake Summer League. Salt Lake Summer League on Friday evening, and then now they're going to be heading into Las Vegas in this coming week for about a week. And so I just wanted to give you, Collin, some thoughts on some of the players from what I've seen out of them. The first player I want to visit is Devin Vassell. You know, I'll kind of go through his games and how he's done, and then kind of some things I've noticed and what I even talked to him about specifically, what he's added to his game. So, you know, he did miss the first game against the Jazz white team due to conditioning. He said he hadn't played basketball in about a week, so I don't know if there was like an injury or what was going on, why he hadn't played basketball in about a week, but he had basically said he just started playing again, and he was out of that game for conditioning the first game. Then he plays against the Jazz blue team, and if you're confused, Spurscast, this is why I'm saying Jazz white, Jazz blue. It's because Utah sent two different summer league teams, but they're both representing the Utah Jazz, so anyway, that's why I called them Jazz white and Jazz blue. Anyway, when he played against the Jazz blue team, he scores 14 points on 17 shot attempts, gets 1 assist and 2 turnovers, and I'm only focusing with him on his playmaking and shot creation stats, because that's kind of what the Spurs want to see. Then on Friday against Memphis, he had a breakout game, 27 points on 30 shot attempts, 2 assists and 3 turnovers. He told us, the media, that after the game that he feels physically like he's at about 75% of where he should be. He thinks that by the time they get to Vegas with a few days off, he can be back to 100% in his conditioning and how he feels. The Spurs are definitely giving him the green light to be the focal point on the offense, especially in the half court. He's getting to run a lot of pick and rolls, getting to run a lot of different isolation type sets, or even like their set motion sets, where he gets to be the player who gets to take the shot at the end of the possession. He's very good so far at getting to the mid-range whenever the defense drops on his pick and roll. So I noticed yesterday in the first quarter, the Jazz defense was kind of dropping on him, and so he would easily just go to where he's most comfortable in the mid-range and get there with the hard dribble right or left, and he'd get there and get a pretty good shot attempt. He's also added that little hesitation dribble when driving, where he kind of gets the defender on his hip. He's kind of learned how to be a little bit more patient with that, and that definitely shows improved ball handling skills. And so I asked him about that. I said, hey, did you work on that in the offseason? And he said yes. And then he also told me he worked on some other stuff, but he didn't want to give it all away, exactly tell what else he's added to his game. He does struggle, though. What we have seen is that he'll struggle, though, in different pick and roll schemes, like when the defense starts blitzing him or when they switch on him. He definitely struggled in those second and third quarters against the Jazz when they did that to him. But he was very open about saying, hey, I want to see those defensive sets because I'm going to learn. That's the only I'm going to learn is if I get the hardest thing the defense is throwing at me. So he was actually glad that the Jazz actually shifted their coverage against him and made him struggle. And then also, we do see, though, that he doesn't quite have the speed yet to take a dribbler, a defender, should I say, off the dribble, where he kind of beats them in one-on-one. He's good. He's pretty good about getting a little crossover into a mid-range jumper, but as far as getting to the rim, he's not quite there yet. So, Collin, just from some of my notes that I've made, what are some of your thoughts on what you're seeing out of Vassell in these first few summer league games?
I talked, and I've talked every Spurscast I've been on recently about the Spurs roster kind of inability to create shots for other players. And so if Vassell is adding to his toolkit the ability to create his own shot and do it at a very efficient rate, then I think, that's just one more pro for him, because he has the shooting capability. I know that last year was kind of an up and down year in terms of that, but obviously the more he adds to his offensive game, the better. And I think this was kind of something you brought up before the podcast, but if the games like that last one in Utah continue, I imagine he's not long for Vegas life.
Yeah.
So, no, but I think, this is obviously a good sign, and I think it's exciting for Spurs fans to see. There is a lot of excitement around DeJounte Murray and Derek White and Lonnie Walker, but I think at this point we kind of reasonably know who they're going to be, and they can still take step forwards and they can still improve kind of in big ways, but we kind of know, okay, maybe there's a really good year with these shooting splits or something, and one of those players could have a really outstanding year, but they're not projected to be perennial all-stars or anything. And right now, neither are Keldon and Vassell probably, but they've been in the league for so short a time that we can't say we know exactly who they're going to be when this is all said and done. So it's fun when there's a player with a lot of potential and they come out and they have this kind of good showing at Summer League. And whether or not that translates to the real league has been different for different players, but obviously it's better than it not happening. It's better than him coming to Summer League and not performing at a high level. So I'm interested to see if this continues in Vegas, and if it does continue and the Spurs kind of pull him out of there, then I think that's a sign that he's pretty important to the Spurs in this upcoming season, kind of like Kawhi was when they pulled him from Summer League back in 2012 or something.
Yeah, it was 2012, and I remember he had 2 25-plus point games, and that was it. They pulled him. It was just 2. So if Devin already has a 27-point night, he better be careful. No, what's also interesting is that before Summer League even started, we had talked to Mitch Johnson before the team departed, before they left to Salt Lake City, and he had said basically, they don't know. We asked him, what are your thoughts on him getting to be a ball handler? And he basically said, I don't know. I really haven't seen him in this role, so this is going to be new for him. And he basically said, this is going to kind of decide, how much they want to give him more responsibility when the full team is together, when the season starts. If he shows that he's actually very productive and he has a really high ceiling for this, well, then, they might be giving him sets off with the second unit, running pick and roll or maybe running it, in the half court. But if he struggles with this, well, then, they'll probably just, keep him more so as, the spot up shooter, the 3-and-D kind of player role that he had similar to last year. So again, for him, there could be a lot there because, like I said, Mitch Johnson, the coach, said that, they're going to really value really evaluate how he does here and determine, how big of a role should they expand his role or how much should they limit it based on what he's doing here. So again, in this game, already 27 points, and like I said, he did struggle. I won't say he was perfect. He struggled there against different pick and roll coverages, but when they were playing that drop defense, if he can at least get that down, because we know a lot of NBA teams like to play drop defense. If you're not a shooter who's like Stephen Curry, who's gonna hurt you from three immediately off the dribble, well then I think that he's we'll see how he does in Vegas, but he's done a good job for himself already initially in these first two games. All right, Collin, now let's go to the next player who, man, it's crazy how time works. So I'm going to give credit to Jeff McDonald, the Express News here, because he basically says it's only been like 8 days since the draft took place, and just the opinions on Josh Primo have definitely changed from some Spurs fans, at least on Twitter, that we've seen some reactions. And Primo has been really impressive, honestly. Like I'm not, we're not no joking aside here. So let's see how Josh Primo has done in these first few summer league games. He missed the first game due to calf tightness, so he didn't play in that first game against Jazz White. Then against Jazz Blue, he comes out with 11 points on 8 shots, 2 assists, and he had a lot of turnovers, 6 turnovers. Then against Memphis on Friday, he ends up having 17 points, the second leading scorer behind only Devin Vassell, on 17 shot attempts, 3 assists, 2 blocks, so he's bringing some stuff on defense there, and he limited his turnovers, which is what he said he wanted to do, with just 3 turnovers. So just some initial thoughts that I've seen and I wrote down, based on what I've seen from him, because again, I didn't watch any Josh Primo in college. I didn't watch any college basketball really. Is he's very good in space when the defense drops or the Spurs run a high pick and roll. So when there's a lot of room for him, he's very comfortable about finding different players or attacking the defense, and especially when there's a lot of space, whether it's like in the open court or if they run a high pick and roll. He's learning how to kind of to get by. He does struggle though, and a lot of his turnovers came more so when he was in the half court and you were like within the 3-point arc setting a pick and roll, and the defense, it's just more congested in the area of the floor. The floor spacing is gone, and so whenever that happens, that's where you see a lot of his turnovers come from it. He's not as quite good just yet in those in the pick and roll in those situations. His passing is very advanced, and even Mitch Johnson, the coach, said he has supernatural passing ability, basically saying that there's not a lot of players who see the kind of angles that Primo sees when driving into the paint, and then also he's able to like deliver these right-handed one-handed passes and also these left-handed one-handed passes. He can basically pass with both hands, on the dribble, and that's kind of very difficult for a lot of players to do. Now like I said, he's had 9 turnovers now in 2 games that he's played. But again, the fact is, even Mitch Johnson and even Devin Vassell both said he's seeing the angles, he's reading the right plays, he's just not able to make them because he's not used to the NBA level, the speed, the adjustments that they make. And so again, they're very high on him right now from what they've seen. He's also good on defense about moving laterally as well, where he does a good job, honestly, of sticking with his defender and not letting him get to his spots that he wants to get to. He's got, even though he's young, he's only 18 years old, he's got a lot of length for him, on him, and he's also got some size to him. He's not quite like you would expect like a rookie to be like a scrawny player, but he's not. He's actually got he's got some good size on him to basically contest shots. There's been possessions where out on the break he's able to contest a shot and at the rim and force the player to miss. And like I just mentioned here, he had 2 blocks in just his first 2 games, and then. This is the part where Spurs fans got really excited, was that just last night in this game against Memphis, he was showing some crazy off the dribble moves and isolation sets where he can like call for a pick and he'll be going to like the left hand dribble and then just pull up for 3 and make it. He can be like in the mid range, just crossing up a player and then just like hitting like a step back fadeaway. And so, yeah. And so the reason why I say that is because like we're going to get, I was already seeing some mentioning of like, there's going to be a point already in the season when like Brynn Forbes isn't having a good night, or Trey Jones or Lonnie Walker. And the Spurs fans are probably going to start calling for Josh Primo to get minutes, and he might be down in Austin. So because of that, I mean, it's crazy how like the perception has already changed just within a few games of summer league here. So what are some of your thoughts based on these summer league notes that I've written? Yeah,
so I'm gonna admit that I'm not necessarily the most like knowledgeable when it comes to player development, but the limited that I do know, like everything that he has been able to display well and everything that he has had a more difficulty with, like you're showing flashes of a player who can be really productive in the NBA. You can't teach vision, you can't teach size, you can't teach knowing how to play the game at a high level. And the fact that he's showing flashes of all of those things now, you can turn back the turnovers. You can't teach him how to see the angles at the level that he's been seeing them. So these are all very, very exciting things because he has skills that are hard to teach, and his mistakes are ones that you can fix. Now, I'm sure that you felt this way too, especially with the way that the Spurs draft. One of the frustrating things, being someone who follows the Spurs, is when they make a draft pick like this, and there's this huge upside, but there's maybe the potential for it not to quite work out, we're not going to have our answer for 2 or 3 years, you know?
Yeah.
We're not going to maybe see him get consistent minutes, unfortunately, unless there's like a crazy injury. We probably won't see him get consistent minutes in the rotation until season 2, just because that's how this has worked for everyone. That's how it worked for DeJounte until Tony Parker got hurt in the playoffs that year. That's how it worked for Derek White. That's how it worked for Lonnie. How it worked for Keldon. Like, that's just how it works. And I know this team is less competitive than it was during that tenure of all of those players I just mentioned, but I think that if Spurs fans are really excited about him, I think that they should probably keep their pulse on how to watch Austin Spurs games, because he will probably be showing all of those same flashes there.
Yeah, and go ahead.
Oh, no, it's just, I think he's an exciting player. He has a lot of skills that are worth getting excited about, and I think it'll be interesting to see if he can show some of them in the Vegas Summer League as well.
Yeah, no, for sure. And I want to give credit to, I think it was Trevor Ziegler, I saw this from on Twitter, and he was basically saying, even though, yes, you're gonna want to see him at the NBA level immediately, you got to give him that chance in Austin to kind of make those mistakes, learn how to, continue to try to make those passing angles and taking those kind of shots, but learning how to make those mistakes where it's not as costly to the team because, they're not at the NBA level just yet. So again, we'll see. I mean, so far, just their two Summer League games, I mean, Joshua Primo was very, very, impressive in what he's shown, on both ends of the floor, so far. And like I said, it was Devin Vassell who had these quotes about him. It was Mitch Johnson, the coach, saying these different things about him as well. All right, so now the last player was the Spurs' second-round draftee. I wanted to see how he played. Joe Wieskamp. He's had kind of a tough Summer League start. He's played in all 3 games. He's been the only one who's been healthy there for all 3 games. Against the Jazz White, with no Primo or Vassell, he scored 4 points on 8 shots, went 0 of 4 from 3 with 3 rebounds. Versus Jazz Blue, he scores 5 points on 8 shots, 1 of 4 from 3, 6 rebounds. And then against Memphis, 7 points on 7 shots, 10 rebounds. And he'd really, he'll probably get some better looks once Trey Jones returns to the lineup, because Trey Jones has been out for all of Summer League so far. He's in the concussion protocol. I guess that happened during training or something. So once Jones comes back, Mitch Johnson said, he'll kind of be the quarterback for the team. And I think that he'll get Wieskamp some of those opportunities he's looking for, more so as like a spot-up shooter or a shooter coming out of like, half-court sets off screens. That's going to be more of his game. And so right now, that the team has had Primo and Vassell running the offense, well then, like I said, they've mainly been more so trying, like I said, they've been taking 17, 30 shots here. So there's not a lot of opportunity for a lot of players to get shots, especially somebody like Wieskamp, who you look for as like a second or third option on an offensive set. And so just some notes that I made, watching so far, is that he does struggle to get open at the NBA level on and off the ball. So I've noticed that, it's hard for him to get away from his defender, kind of, whether he has the ball in his hands or not. So that's something that's going to be an issue for him early on. When he does get a shot off in the spot up or off screen or off the dribble handoff action, he has shown that he has good form on the shot. They're just not going in right now, but I can definitely tell he can make the 3 ball if he can get the shot. That's the thing, is he has to be able to get the shot. And then I've seen him struggle a little bit on off-ball defense, and then he's been very impressive again, even though he hasn't been doing it a lot on offense. Just the fact that he's continued to be getting defensive boards there. He got, like I said, he had 10 boards, 7 boards in a game, or 6 boards in a game, for his size at like 6'6", 6'7" kind of range. So just based on some of these notes, what are some of your thoughts on Wieskamp?
So kind of just like what we talked about with, all of the things that are exciting. For me, when I hear things like he has difficulty getting away from his defender, that is something that worries me a little bit. That might be something where, as time goes on, that he can improve it. However, I think that a lot of the times we look at shooting and we look at it in a vacuum and we think, oh, a good shooter, my NBA team of choice needs a good shooter because that's the best skill. But if he's unable to get open, then that will become problematic. And I think if he can learn to kind of navigate screens off ball, kind of like a JJ Redick or a Joe Harris,
yeah,
his value to an NBA team goes way up. So I think that's kind of the big swing skill for him, is being able to move, really honestly more so without the ball. Can he navigate screens without the ball? Can he find ways to get himself open and then hit shots consistently? Because if he can, then he's an NBA player, and that's just so valuable. So it'll just be interesting to see how that skill develops, because that really is a swing skill for a shooter like him, in my opinion.
Yeah, and for a player like him, who again, he's not the primary ball handler. He needs to have chemistry with the guards or whoever's making the playmaking. So if he doesn't have that chemistry, it's tough, because they're only looking out for him if they have to bail on a possession and really just find kick out to a 3-point shooter. Whereas somebody like Trey Jones, who's more of a natural point guard, like Coach Mitch Johnson called him a quarterback. He's going to know exactly. I got to keep getting Primo. I got to get Primo involved. I got to get Devin involved. I got to get Wieskamp involved. On a possession here. So I think he also needs more so like a natural point guard, or just more time with some of these players to try to get more against some different kind of open shots and opportunities. All right, so thank you, Spurscast listeners, for listening to this episode. Don't forget to visit projectspurs.com. We're continuing to cover free agency. Again, there's going to be some moves that have to be made by the time opening night gets here, because this roster just cannot go into opening night with more than 15 players. Vegas Summer League is about to start. We have all of our analysis over on the Utah Summer League over on Project Spurs. You can read those. We have different writers, just writing different analysis. We have another piece also by one of our newest writers, Evan Townsend. He writes, why Josh Primo went from underwhelming pick to exciting pickup. So again, you can read Evan's new piece over on projectspurs.com. Thanks again to Collin for joining me here on the Spurscast, and also to Michael DeLeon for mixing and producing this episode. From all of us at Project Spurs, stay safe and have a great day.